The previous basket is under review.
Welcome to March. Scout team is rocking and rolling. We have, Fawcett, what I think we are going to deem today the Haters Guide to March Madness, the reason why all the best teams in college basketball might not win it all. The issue that you could exploit. We did a big version of this with Michigan at one point in the season when it looked like they were maybe unbeatable or close to it. We have since sort of seen some of those flaws exploited. We can't do that in depth with everybody, but we wanted to. I think, and this we think this is a cool idea. Just show you, hey, like, here's the one thing I'm worried about. Here's the one thing that's sticking in my mind, and we'll see if it registers with the viewers as well. So excited for this one. Excited. Curious after you just did a kind of quick dive of all the elite teams. Did anyone change your mind? Do you think this kind of top heavy perception of the sport for this year's tournament rings true, or do you feel like a lot of these teams are vulnerable?
Yeah, I think that's what's great about college basketball always is that the teams at the top still feel somewhat vulnerable even when they're incredible. I feel like kind of came across when we did our Michigan video and they still looked unbelievable. We were like, okay, well, we still have this concern and we'll talk about it when we get to them in this video. It's something that we already addressed. And I feel like that's what makes college basketball great is we don't have the clear, we don't have the three dynasties. It's not like a decade where it's like LeBron versus the Warriors, no matter what. And I think that also it's kind of big in the college basketball space for every big game to just be a referendum on something. So like whatever team wins, they are the greatest team ever. And then like somehow if they were to lose by 1 point, then it's like, wow, they're terrible and everything's wrong. How did they get to this point? So that's also why it's kind of nice to put some of our receipts out there. Not that I'm ready to proclaim any of these teams as certainly not like bad. Certainly, I don't feel like either of them are particularly on upset watch or fraud watch, but obviously they can't all win championships. So I am glad we're kind of getting our receipts out there. So whenever they lose, whether that's a national championship, Final Four, Elite Eight, maybe before, we'll see what you think, what people in the comments think. But it is kind of nice to just get our receipts out there because you do know if one of these teams bows out early, some people that would be talking about how they were clear Final Four favorites would suddenly be like, well, and this is why they were never going to win, and so we're getting our takes out there. We'll have some things out there just in case something does happen. But yeah, really, really kind of fun look. And I'm also gonna, maybe save my bigger takeaways for totally the end of the video, but some of the trends between these teams as well, kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, the number one thing you will learn from following college basketball writers on Twitter is that there are no elite teams in college basketball. It does not matter how good or how bad teams are playing. There's no elite teams. Nobody is unbeatable. And that is true. A single elimination basketball, beautiful thing. So a lot of these teams are elite, in my opinion. They are dominant, but they are beatable, just like Duke was last year in the Final Four. Just like Florida, obviously. Florida won the national championship. I don't think anyone would say that was an unbeatable team. It took a lot for the Gators to get there. So we're going to do we're going to do 8 teams today. We're going to go rapid fire through them. The 4 projected 1 seeds, the 4 projected 2 seeds. If your team doesn't make the cut, that doesn't mean we think they suck. It just means they weren't in our quote unquote elite tier of top 2 seeds. And that means we start with the projected overall number 1 seed, the Duke Blue Devils, and their questions at point guard. They've existed last year with the Tyrese Proctor situation. They've managed them this year with Caleb Foster and Caden Boozer. Now Foster injured, his prognosis somewhat unknown, questionable it seems at best for the remainder of the year. Just diving into the film, you do feel like it would help, as good as Cam Boozer is, to have another just true stabilizer on the floor at points.
I think that's what makes Duke so fascinating to watch, especially even when they're winning all these games, is that their guards don't seem to make things easier for other players on the court. It almost, after really watching the film for this, it almost came across of just like, that is just how good Cam Boozer is, because it's not like he has guards that are like giving him anything easy. And also you kind of see with these point guards, the ability to make anything happen, whether it's like after they get an advantage created for them, whether they need to make something happen at the end of a shot clock or the end of the game. They're just like not really talented scorers, and they're also not really talented table setters. And you just wonder, is there going to be a situation where Duke needs something offensively from someone other than Boozer. And could these guards kind of make it happen? Really love their defensive game, but the more I watch offensively, the more I'm like, oh man, it just wouldn't shock me if they played really well defensively, if Cam Boozer was incredible and they still scored 71 points and lost by a couple. Just that kind of style of play and looking at those point guards.
Well, and the other thing I would say, look, I think the narrative, and we've talked about it on the show, like the narrative that like, oh, Shire can't coach in big games or can't close out games is sort of ridiculous. But, you know, the most game pressure by far is in an NCAA tournament game when a team is making a run on you. And the best way to avoid that is have that point guard, have that true stabilizer. And I think last year we said maybe Cooper can be that. And you'd say this year, yeah, maybe Cam can be that. And I totally believe that. But I do just sometimes wish you'd look over and say, man, I really trust this guy. And I do like Caden a lot. I think Caden could be maybe like a breakout star of March, especially if Foster's out. But sometimes you just feel like you're missing something. And that would be the one hole with this group. Obviously phenomenal, been dominant, but just pointing that out here as we get going. Michigan is our second team. They're the number 2 overall seed in the bracket, more likely than not. And we've talked about them a lot, and I think it's pretty obvious in our conversations. We think they're an incredible team. Their ceiling is super high, but if you can make them play in the half court and execute, it's touch and go. Sometimes it's really great. Sometimes it's super crisp. Sometimes they're making shots, and sometimes their half court offense bogs down a little bit. And if they get forced into a grinder where they have to execute in the half court, I do think that's when you start to say maybe this Wolverine team a little bit vulnerable.
That's just it. They've been so good in transition, so good turning steals into points on the other end. They've been so good on the glass. But yeah, when it comes to their half court game, whether it's kind of getting through some of their sets, there's some moments of absolute brilliance. And you'll see it on Twitter when Dusty May dials up something amazing and they execute it at a high level. But when they just get through some of their regular stuff, nothing comes easy to them. And I think that's where early in the season, that's part of why like Lendenberg look so good, is just because he was making some tough shots. And you look at the tough shot making and it was really impressive, but it's also like, okay, why did he need to make tough shots? It's because, well, they weren't always executing at a really high level. And you can kind of see sometimes they do get a little bit stuck in one-on-one play without the kind of one-on-one players that I think are that skilled or that equipped to make things happen. And we saw this against Duke as well, where even against a very stout defensive team, they're playing at some pretty stacked floors. So that's just, I would just put Michigan in another category of one of those teams that I just wouldn't be surprised to see a first half where they score 28 points, even against a lesser opponent, and they just dig themselves a little bit too much of a hole. Now, again, another team that their defense is dominant, another team that can win ugly, even if they're not making shots. But I just think at some points in a 40-minute game with a 30-second shot clock, something becomes low possession and someone else gets hot and they're just stuck in a bit of a slog trying to get these guards to create late in the end of shot clocks. Yeah, it could be a little bit of a problem for Michigan, I think.
Yeah, 1,000%. And look, the other thing I would say, and this is applicable to all these teams, but I think especially Michigan, like the times in history where a team has gone through the NCAA tournament and not had like a sort of 50-50 game at one point, kind of late in the game that they had to go close, that was ugly, that was quote unquote the shot to get them, has been very limited. Like I think of UConn, the 2 years that they won it here recently as maybe the outlier to that. But even in those games, like, there was a point where there was real game pressure against Alabama. There was a point where there was real game pressure against Purdue. There were moments. I mean, there was a 5-point game against San Diego State in the championship in the first title year. Like those moments will happen. And so I think as much as anything with this video, and I think Michigan's a great example, like we're scripting out, like, here's the thing that will happen to get them in the 50-50 game. And then we'll see what they're really made of, see if they can close it out. So I think with that, we move to Arizona, number 3 overall seed projected at the moment, a team that obviously is super talented, monsters at the rim, great defensively, really excellent guards, but really playing with fire. I mean, statistically, there's just never been a team that comes anywhere near what Arizona does in terms of the lack of 3-point shooting, and not just the ability to make them, just the ability to take them. And again, you look at formulas and wanting to win different ways. Like, I worry about what happens with Arizona if they get into chase mode in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think when talking about Arizona and their lack of 3-point shooting, it's one thing to just say like, oh yeah, they don't make it enough, they don't take a lot, but it's starting to kind of look like the way that teams are playing them, they're starting to really just like realize, no, this team is not trying to take threes. And it just seems like at all points, anytime they drive, they're driving into a sea of bodies because people realize they can just completely leave multiple players, get a piece of the paint, and contest against some of these talented downhill guards, against some of these bigs. Like watching on these plays, like the way that shooters will just get absolutely abandoned. It's kind of crazy because not all these guys are just like non-shooters, terrible shooters, but they catch looking to drive, and you'll see that they'll punch, they'll find someone on the perimeter who will immediately punch, and there's just bodies in the paint at all times. And I do wonder if that could get them a little bit stuck at times, when again some of these drivers are not allowed to be their regular dynamic self just because of the spacing. And then the bigger thing is probably, like you said, if they do get behind by 8 or 9 or 10 points in the second half, can they power ball their way back into the game without the use of the 3-point shot? Oh, it's certainly possible, but that could certainly be a recipe for a lesser team, just through the math problem, to just take 45-50% of their shots from three, and if they're having a hot night, probably stay in it with in Arizona.
Right. Well, and the other thing I would say with this, I think the thing you have to remember is that teams will, and certainly teams should, coach in the NCAA tournament a little bit differently, be a little bit, especially if you're at a talent disadvantage. Like there's no incentive to just play it conservative and like, play the percentages and hope you win. Like teams are, especially underdogs, lower seeded teams, are heavily incentivized to throw like drastic coverages out there to an extent and give themselves an increased chance of winning, even if it means maybe an increased chance of getting blown out. And I think with Arizona, the true packing of the paint's a perfect example of that, right? You might as well just take your shot, live with them shooting anything over the top. That would have been probably, in my estimation, the thing I worry about is what happens if someone just throws something crazy at them. And, in those games, like once you start missing them, like the scariest thing for a coach is watching a player that everyone is daring to shoot start shooting and start missing. Like that is a very scary world to me. And I know Fawcett can feel it. I've certainly watched it enough times. I've talked to enough people. Like that's a scary place to be. And I worry a little with Arizona. Like you're gonna sit there, hey Jaden Bradley, like go beat us, and he probably will. Like there's a good chance he will. He's a better shooter, probably than maybe his numbers totally would represent, especially when he's shooting practice shots essentially. But it's worth considering. It's worth watching with Arizona. It would be certainly a trend buster if they're able to win a championship, given their lack of reliance on the three. Next up, our fourth number one seed is Florida. And Florida's had a unique year, obviously. We've talked about them on the show. We've talked about them certainly in the Discord and on Basket Review. It's a unique journey where they got punched in the mouth in a lot of senses. And I think people kind of wrote them off, especially after that Missouri loss. The guard play just wasn't good enough. And that's changed. The guards have been a lot better. They found some lineups that work. It's been impressive to see their evolution, but this is still a team that I think has shaky guard play at points and inconsistent guard play. And consistency is the name of the game when you need 6 straight wins. And I think that's what you start to worry about with Florida, especially, I think Boogie's kind of figured it out a little bit, especially like his impact outside of scoring the ball, distributing, defense. Xavier Lee, like the shots better be going in, dude. Like that, it's important, for their team that he finds a way to put the ball in the rim.
Yeah, start of the year was these guys both couldn't shoot. Also, not really guys who can finish at the rim. So you can see why there was some disaster early. And now, even as the narrative has kind of been that these guys are playing a lot better, it's like Boogie Flan has been an elite defender, but he still cannot make a shot. And you just wonder what that's going to do in a single elimination game. And then Xavier Lee has started to shoot the ball better and a little bit more consistently, especially just off the catch, which is something you'd certainly hope from him, but still, like the quality of shot he's going to take is always going to lead him into inefficiency. And then the big piece with him is, even as he's started to at least shoot the ball a little bit better, but is still not plus value from him as a shooter. But the turnovers just come at a really, really high level. And you just wonder, can a team win with 2 guards that are just inconsistent to at best average shooters, that are, Flan doesn't really turn over the ball a ton, but Lee turns it over a bunch. Like it's it's just kind of it's shocking, of course, how Florida has been really playing like one of the best teams in the country last few weeks and still don't have anything close to the best point guard play. And that would also be a really interesting thing for college basketball. Florida won for a team that doesn't have great guard play when it just, for years, everyone's been like, oh, college basketball is like all about guard play. Well, yeah, Florida's going to be a lot of people's title picks with some pretty erratic guards. So it's a really interesting story, really.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, the turnovers are probably the most under-discussed topic. It's like it's funny because I think in a lot of respects, like people get so focused on, Xavier Lee was 2 for 10. Like with the way Florida plays, with the way that the offensive rebound, every shot is a good shot. Like for Xavier Lee, I don't care. Like put the ball on the rim. Ruben Chinyelu is going to get it. He's going to go up and get that thing. And the turnovers are what has really killed them. When they've been bad, it has not been those guys not making shots. It's been turning the basketball over. And that'll be a huge storyline here to watch over the next 3-4 weeks. Next up, we have UConn, who comes in probably the most like on thin ice in some respect of the teams that we're looking at, just off of a really poor performance against Marquette. I will say in that game, it was truly like a shot quality win for UConn. Like if you look at the box, I looked at the box score. I wasn't watching. I was at the Valley tournament. Like I looked at the box score. I was like, how in the world did they lose this game other than just shot making? Like they dominated every statistical category. But that's life. And again, this has been a team that has played with his food, that's been inconsistent, that has turned the ball over too much, that's been sloppy, just hasn't been quite as sharp as you would expect a Dan Hurley team to be. And we're running out of time here. Like this, like I think there's been a lot of like, man, what happens when UConn hits that second gear? Still waiting. It's March 9th on this recording day. We're still waiting.
Yeah, high degree of difficulty with how UConn plays offense. And that's what was so brilliant about the championships, was because there was a high degree of difficulty, or the highest degree of difficulty of any team in college basketball, and they executed it. So that's why we saw some of the best offenses we've ever seen at the college level. This year, this group of players does not seem as equipped to handle that and go through these offensive progressions, run these complex sets, and you see that they don't execute them well. They get stuck. They kind of start scrambling, and it's turned into a lot of turnovers. And I look at the defensive numbers for UConn, and that's been really impressive. It's great to see that they've been able to play really well in some other ways, but I don't know if I think that they are actually the top 10-ish defense. And if their offense is going to play this way, where they don't have the guards who can really execute the stuff they need to at a really high level, and suddenly like Alex Caravan is having to create with the ball in his hands, and which is, he's a tremendous player, but kind of having to play a tougher role than what he probably should be doing. You can kind of, understand a couple of the tough losses they've had this season, and they become like this fascinating, very high floor, but probably low like high ceiling, but low floor team in the eyes of a lot of people. And I kind of see it the same way. Things can get pretty sloppy with the way that some of these possessions get.
Yeah, no question. And I think you're right that a lot of it is just due to the complexity of what they do on both ends of the floor, particularly though on offense. And it's actually something I think to monitor going forward with UConn as we get into more of a year-to-year cycle. Can they continue to operate this way? Can they be at such a high level? Like, obviously they value skill and IQ at such a high level in recruiting, and that's huge. But the level of continuity that you need to do what they do is I think higher than people would probably think. And it's also probably underrated just how amazing Cam Spencer was for that, right? Like just sort of a one of one type individual in the portal in a lot of respects. So look, not writing off UConn by any means, but Marquette certainly was a surprising result and something that I think people will keep in the back of their minds on Selection Sunday. Number 6, we'll do Houston. We talked about Houston quite a bit, and I don't think anyone who watches the show religiously is going to be surprised at our angle. They take a lot of mid-range shots. It's sort of a fascinating thought experiment of can you build a championship team? Can you win in March and win at the highest level, win a national championship, being this mid-range reliant, essentially losing the shot quality war every single night? I think every piece of evidence says you can win in March because they've won in March, but they haven't broken through to win the title yet. And I do think the shot quality, especially down the stretch against Florida, we've talked about it at length, is a real thing. And with this group, no post ups. That's really the big thing. I'm sort of, think is different with this group is last year, they could throw it to Roberts and Roberts could get them one. It wasn't the most efficient basketball, but you need those grinded out 0.8 points per possession moments. And they don't have that in the same way with this group. And that's, I think, something that I'm fascinated to monitor.
Yeah, it's always so hard where I want to be like, yeah, this is not a championship winning formula. You can't win this way, but it's obviously like they've won at a high level for a number of years doing this. And they were, a bounce away from winning a championship last year. But I think the thing that still is different when I look at last year versus this year is just how many of these mid-range shots come with 21 seconds on the shot clock. And you mentioned the post up threat last year. They don't have this year. It did seem like there was a little bit more of getting into their offense. And then once the ball was kicked out, you would have liked to catch and shoot three, and then they would turn it into a pull-up mid-range, which again, like not great. We're still able to do that. But this particular year, it is a lot of walking up, and the first thing you do is just take a guy off the dribble and pull up. And it just seems like even those shots are a little bit lower quality. Now Kingston Flemings is amazing, and therefore because of his contributions, the efficiency is still around where it was last year on these shots. But just kind of to my eye, just for someone to just dribble the ball up and take one of these tough attempts, it just seems like even more low percentage basketball than last year, where they would get a paint touch, then it would get kicked out, and you're like, well, we probably should have taken that open catch and shoot three instead of the like 2 dribble pull up. But like it just, I don't know. It still seemed like higher percentage stuff. And it just seems like the degree of difficulty on the mid-range looks is even higher this year.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. And, we talked about it when we did the video about Houston. Like I really believed in a lot of ways that Kingston Flemings would just completely take over this offense and just be a paint touch god. And, it's been more bumpy. It's been up and down for him in February in a lot of respects. It's been, there have been some really bright moments, but I think you kind of felt like, man, maybe 46 is this like coming out party, or 44. I forget how many he had. I think it was 44 or 46. I thought this like, okay, here we go. Right. Like here comes Kingston. And, it hasn't quite been that smooth. And maybe he just goes on a Kemba Walker March type run, right? Like there's a point guard every year that does it. But, it hasn't quite like the optimistic vision I had for Houston involved this kind of continued development of Kingston into one of the best players in the country. And it hasn't been that smooth. So fascinated to watch him, but certainly it'd be cool for Kelvin and the journalist in me, the storyteller in me. If Emmanuel Sharp somehow had a shot to win the championship this time around, man, would we eat that up. So we'll keep an eye on that. Michigan State, our second to last team on this video. Really, really good. Really, really tough. Elite point guard play, dominant on the glass. Sort of lacking scoring talent, shot making juice, I think would be the, simplest way to put it. Like, and I apologize. I know some people on this who watch the show are like true, like X and O's guys and really want to like dive in. And some of these you need a little bit more bucket getting in March. And, I think they found some answers with Fears just going and getting one and playing in ball screens and, getting to some of those middies and floaters and drawing fouls. He's an incredible foul drawer. I won't even say baiter because he is getting hammered in a lot of these. But you look around at this line, it's a man, like you're really missing one or two guys that you really trust, right? I mean, Jace Richardson, quite frankly, would have been a huge addition to this group. But intrigued your thoughts, Fawcett, on how they're built.
I mean, you can see why Jeremy Fears takes all those mid-range shots, because the spacing that they put themselves in is just so congested. And look how many of these possessions just have guys sitting in the lane, taking away any kind of clear opportunity to go get a layup, where at first I'd probably look at Fears and be like, oh, he shoots a little bit too much in the mid-range for my liking. But then I watch a Michigan State plays. I'm like, well, what else is he supposed to do when there's just constantly bodies in front of him? And if he was to beat his initial man off the dribble, there's always going to be someone waiting there for them. So I do feel like the spacing and the amount of possessions that just have multiple players in the paint and just makes things so difficult for Michigan State. It could really kind of hamper their ability to put points on the board. And again, even if they were trying to get Jeremy Fears to like really get loose in a big game, I think there's going to be times where he's becomes a little bit quiet, and you kind of see their stretches where I don't think it's him. I just think like on all these plays, like where's he supposed to go with the ball? There's just constantly teammates and their defenders in front of them, and just the super clogged up floor, clunky offense of Michigan State. I mean, that's just another one that if you saw a team come in and get up and down and take a bunch of threes, and then you just got this, basketball in the mud on the other end, that could be the downfall of Michigan State.
Yeah. And look, I mean, they made an Elite Eight last year, lost to a really excellent Auburn team that was just, as big and physical as they were and, more offensively gifted. I think that, might be what it takes to knock out Michigan State this year, but we shall see. I'm still a big believer. And I think, again, Michigan State is actually like, again, sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of like, it's the true test of like, do the March truisms pay off? Oh, you got to have the elite point guard. Oh, you got to have the veteran coach. Oh, you got to have the rebounding and the toughness. They check all of those boxes in droves. Do they have, maybe some of the other stuff that you need to cut down the nets? Finally, we've got Illinois. Illinois is a lot of fun. Obviously a lot made of their offense. It's number one in the country. It's been phenomenal. Keaton Wagler's been one of the great stories in the sport. He's super dynamic. Their defense has improved statistically from a year ago, but I do think over the last several weeks, you've seen, some cracks in the armor in terms of, individual elite shot makers going and getting theirs, right? They have Kylan Boswell to lock down one guy, especially as they've gone to these lineups with more shooting on the floor, ditching Stojakovic. It gets a little dicey when there's multiple guys that can go get a shot, and multiple guys that can really touch the paint. And again, we've talked about a lot of these conservative defenses that on the macro can be pretty good statistically, but on a micro scale in an individual game or an individual matchup can get exposed pretty quickly. And I worry about that with this Illinois group.
Yeah, it's kind of another example too. It feels like sometimes like defensive efficiency, like a points per possession thing doesn't even always tell the whole story, because where it's technically a miss and a turnover are kind of the same from a points per possession standpoint, where it's just like Illinois' kind of inability to create turnovers. It just makes everything for the offense they're playing against look easier and kind of feel easier. And you can kind of see it in the final score. And that's kind of the problem too, is just because they just do not create turnovers, they're always kind of putting themselves also in position to like give up offense rebounds. Now they rebound well, don't get me wrong, but it's just when you're allowing opponents to just constantly get clean looks at the rim, you're obviously getting that first shot. They're giving up second chance opportunities more so than if they were able to crank up their steals a little bit more. And you can see how they will sell out on trying to take away easy catch and shoot attempts, but it allows a lot of straight line drives. I think that's where you've seen what you mentioned, where there's the star players have really had their way against Illinois. It's because Illinois is not be like, oh, this is a star player that's really low to the ball and try to make sure they can't get right to the rim, or let's try to be disruptive and deny the ball. They're kind of just going to say, okay, well, this guy's really elite. Let's make sure that this guy's going to have to shoulder a massive load. And let's make sure this person is not going to, this great player is not going to turn his drives into catch and shoot open 3-point shots for players that aren't as skilled and need those manufactured for them. So watching the defensive tape, it's can be a little easy to play against Illinois.
Yeah, no question. And I do worry about that. And then look, they're another team that has not been super hot entering the tournament, right? Stumbled through Maryland, had a couple of surprising losses. Didn't play as well as you probably would have liked against in the Michigan game. Not necessarily expect to win it, but could have been better. The team that it's all about peaking at the right time in a lot of respects and playing your best basketball. And it does feel like maybe they've stagnated a little bit from where they were in late January, early February, when it felt like this team was really bound for special things. Maybe they still are. They're really, really good. I love watching them, but fascinated to see what it looks like in the tournament setting. And we'll obviously know soon enough. Selection Sunday on its way. Fawcett, I guess, big picture. Do you think these teams are like early round vulnerable, or when you watch some of the film, do you think this is maybe more, all right, this is how these clash of titans, these monster matchups, these are how the wars will get won? I'm curious your angle on that.
Yeah, just like the level of size and physicality just makes it feel like these teams, there's just very little chance at for sure, the 15-2, the of course 16-1. But I think kind of my general thought, like, these teams is like, with the exception of Illinois, these are all big physical kind of rock fighty teams that are much better on the defensive side than the offensive side. And you look at like last year when Duke's offensive numbers were tremendous and Auburn was up there, and obviously they were injured, but they were kind of known for the points they were putting up, and like Florida was just raining down threes. And it just seemed like last year was a little bit more of like offense at the top of the sport, and it is unmistakably defense this year. Like, when just kind of looking at the 8 teams we just talked about, you probably saw a lot of the same kind of things we talked about. Oh, like, few of these teams, their point guards, their guard play, not actually that stellar. Sometimes maybe even mediocre, and just kind of like general offensive efficiency or execution, pretty low for a lot of these teams. I mean, you could really argue the only offensive really first team that we looked at was Illinois. I mean, it's still sometimes when I know the numbers would suggest UConn is much better on the defensive side than the offensive side. I don't know. It's just like still hard with their style of play for me to not think about them as offensive, but whatever the case may be, I find it very interesting as just a sport that after many years where it was the offenses at the top of the sport, this is a very defense heavy size, physicality, rebounding top of the sport this year. And that is, again, just what I as someone who does not totally ascribe to the like defense wins championship things in basketball in 2026, this will be a very interesting year. Like, if we see all these teams march to the Final Four, then it'll be like, okay, look, yeah, we're back to defense wins championships. If some of these teams get picked off because a 5, 6, or 7 seed that's got some holes, isn't as athletic, isn't as big, but can make shots and be a lot more efficient on the offensive end, I could see us coming back to like, kind of interesting that all these teams of the sport were just like built like football teams. So that's kind of my thought after looking at all of these teams and where we think they're most vulnerable. And that's where I'm not ready to proclaim that I think they're all going to get upset before their seed expectation. But, if it does, that will make for a very interesting narrative. And if these teams, if it's 4 1 seeds or 3 1 seeds in a 2, or like in the Final Four, like, yeah, it'll be quite the mark for or quite the support for anyone whose defense wins championships.
Yeah, look, I would say this, I think the narrative of like, go Cinderella's dead, it's all driven by people talking about NIL and the portal. And I don't think NIL and the portal don't contribute necessarily to it. And they don't necessarily, I think they do contribute to this point that I'm about to make. But I think as much as anything, what we've seen, as you sort of alluded to there, is like this real sea change of the best teams being so built around like just pure strength, physicality. You see it in the offensive rebounding numbers, really more than anything. Like, a lot of these teams are just so driven by physicality, strength, toughness, and overall size that it's harder to envision, this team in this 14 seed that can shoot the lights out, or this team, they're actually physically more capable of hanging with the high major. I would have said a couple of years ago, I think about like a team like High Point that's got some high major down transfers. And I'd say, man, like athletically, like they can match up a little bit. Like, I don't feel that way when I look at essentially any mid-major basketball team compared to these 8, and then a few below them. Like, it's just different. Like, the way these rosters are constructed. Again, I'm not going to say that NIL and the portal aren't a part of this. Of course they are, but it's not. I don't think it's the only factor. I think it's the roster building kind of conversation as well. So I think it's fascinating to watch. Thank you guys all for watching this video. The Haters Guide to March. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you stuck around long enough to see my ring light go on mid-video. High level tech stuff from me. Was not prepared for just how quickly the sun would go down in the new daylight savings world. Thankful this year, daylight savings, not Selection Sunday night. That is a brutal one to lose the hour then, but wasn't easy this time as well. Please subscribe, check out the YouTube channel. It's big time content really throughout the run up to Selection Sunday. I know the folks on the bracketology side over at Bass Interview are doing a great job. So check them out, certainly. And see you next week with more videos and more content right here on Scout Team.